The studio buzzed with the low murmur of anticipation as cameras adjusted their focus. The stage lights shone a little too brightly, illuminating the polished set where Sophia Grant, a seasoned TV host with a reputation for sharp-witted interviews, sat across from Clint Eastwood. Dressed in a tailored suit, Eastwood maintained a composed demeanor, his expression unreadable yet confident. Though in his 90s, he carried an undeniable presence, a mix of quiet resilience and the weight of expectation that came with his legendary status in Hollywood. If you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest content. The conversation had started smoothly. They discussed politics, culture, and the pressures of being in the public eye for decades. But Sophia, ever the strategist, shifted the discussion with a pointed look. Then she struck. "Take it off." The words cut through the air, sharper than the studio lights. The audience, mid-breath, froze. Eastwood's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering, as he instinctively touched the small cross pendant resting against his chest. Sophia leaned forward, her tone neutral yet challenging. "You talk about unity and inclusivity, but isn't that necklace a symbol of exclusivity? A declaration of division?" The silence in the room was deafening. Even those who usually championed Sophia's bold questioning shifted in their seats, sensing that this wasn't just a debate, it was a demand. Eastwood didn't flinch. He didn't rush to respond. Instead, he let the moment settle, let the weight of her words linger before answering. But before he could speak, the tension in the room had already shifted. This wasn't just a question about a necklace. It was about something much deeper. The silence in the studio was thick, stretching long enough for the hum of the overhead lights to become audible. The camera zoomed in, catching every micro-expression, every flicker of reaction. The audience, usually quick to laugh or murmur in agreement with Sophia Grant's sharp commentary, seemed hesitant, as if uncertain whether to side with her demand or recoil at the blatant challenge. Across from her, Clint Eastwood sat, one hand resting lightly on the small silver cross, pendant that had unexpectedly become the focal point of the entire interview. His other hand remained on the armrest of his chair, fingers relaxed, betraying none of the tension that hung in the air. Sophia didn't smile. She wasn't the type to hesitate, and she certainly wasn't the type to back down. Leaning forward, she repeated herself, her voice controlled, smooth but pressing. "Take it off, Clint." This time it wasn't just a statement, it was an order. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few of them glanced at each other, uncertain. It was one thing to challenge someone on policy, on opinions, even on family history. But this was different. Eastwood exhaled slowly, still not answering, still letting the weight of the moment settle, letting her own words sink into the room. Sophia picked up on it, the waiting, the patience, and she didn't like it. She thrived on control, on keeping the upper hand, on being the one who dictated the pace of an interview. And right now, Eastwood was doing something she hadn't anticipated. He wasn't flustered, he wasn't defensive, he wasn't reacting at all. So she pushed harder. "Come on," she continued, tilting her head, voice laced with something between amusement and challenge. "You're a public figure, whether you like it or not. You talk about open-mindedness, about understanding different perspectives, but that necklace, it's a symbol of a belief system that not everyone in this country shares. You really think it belongs on a national stage?" She let the words sit there, confident they would land the way she wanted them to. It was a classic rhetorical strategy. Corner the guest, force them to acknowledge the contradiction, frame them as hypocritical. It had worked 1,000 times before, but Eastwood still didn't flinch. He blinked once, slow and deliberate, and then finally he spoke. "I appreciate the concern, Sophia." His voice was calm, measured, almost too calm. It threw her off for half a second, just enough for the cameras to catch the briefest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "But let me ask you something," he continued, adjusting his posture slightly, not away from her, but forward, leaning in just a fraction, mirroring her own stance. "Are you actually uncomfortable with my necklace, or are you uncomfortable with what it represents?" A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Sophia blinked. It was a small reaction, but on live television, Even the smallest hesitation was magnified. Eastwood's gaze remained steady. You say this is about inclusion, that this is about understanding different perspectives. So help me understand. Why does my faith make you uncomfortable? It was a question she hadn't expected. Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't like being on the defensive. She never had to be. That wasn't how these interviews worked. She leaned back, buying herself a second, then smiled, a tight, practiced expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. This isn't about your faith, she said smoothly. It's about the message it sends. Eastwood lifted an eyebrow slightly. The message it sends? Sophia nodded. Public figures shape public culture, Clint. You know that better than anyone. And symbols like that, she gestured toward the cross necklace, they send a message of exclusivity. They suggest that one belief system holds more weight than the rest. Eastwood listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he waited a second before responding, making it clear he wasn't reacting emotionally. He was considering. Interesting, he finally said. So if someone wore a rainbow pin on this stage, would you ask them to take it off? A sharp inhale rippled through the audience. Sophia's expression barely flickered, but Eastwood caught the shift in her posture, the slight straightening of her back, the way her fingers flexed against the cue cards in front of her. She knew she'd just walked into a trap. That's different, she said, her tone cooling. Eastwood tilted his head slightly. Is it? Another murmur spread through the audience. Sophia pursed her lips, exhaling through her nose. This isn't about other symbols, Clint. It's about power dynamics. For centuries, Christianity dominated Western culture. People were forced to conform. Now we live in a more diverse society. Isn't it time we made space for everyone instead of clinging to old traditions? Eastwood studied her. Then very deliberately, he reached down and lifted the necklace slightly between his fingers. You say this is about power, he said, his voice quieter now. But you're the one asking me to take it off. The room went absolutely still. Eastwood let the words hang there. He didn't need to say more. The contradiction spoke for itself. Sophia's expression remained composed, but something in her eyes flickered. Annoyance, perhaps. Frustration. She knew what was happening. He was flipping the dynamic. He wasn't getting angry. He wasn't getting defensive. He was staying calm, deliberate, unshaken. And in doing so, he was exposing the flaw in her argument without ever having to raise his voice. The power shift was beginning, and the audience could feel it. In the control room, producers watched anxiously as the live feed continued streaming. Someone muttered, "We should cut to commercial," but it was too late. Social media was already lighting up, and Clint Eastwood wasn't done yet. For a few excruciating seconds, the studio was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The tension felt almost physical, like a weight pressing down on the room. The camera zoomed in on Sophia Grant's face. The seasoned TV host, usually quick on her feet, was visibly processing what had just happened. Across from her, Clint Eastwood sat, calm, composed, and waiting. And that waiting, it was deliberate, a calculated move. He had taken her challenge, her demand for him to remove the necklace, and turned it into something else entirely. Now it was no longer a question about a piece of jewelry. It was about fairness, consistency, and whether the standards Sophia set for him applied to others as well. Sophia knew it. The audience knew it. And social media? It was already exploding. In the control room, producers watched in real time as comments flooded in beneath the live broadcast. Did he just flip that entire argument around in under 5 seconds? Liberal host just got checkmated. He didn't even raise his voice. That's how you know he won. Why is she so pressed about a necklace? A producer muttered under his breath. We need to pivot. Fast. But Sophia wasn't out of the game yet. She was a professional. She had handled dozens of controversial guests before. Politicians, activists, public figures. She knew how to recover, so she did what she did best. She adjusted. With a measured breath, she shifted in her seat and let out a small, amused chuckle. All right, she said smoothly, regaining her composure. I'll give you credit for that. That was clever. She leaned forward again, resting her hands on the table between them. But let's not pretend this is just about a necklace. Eastwood gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. I agree, it's not. Sophia arched an eyebrow. Then tell me, what is it really about? Eastwood tilted his head slightly, studying her. He could answer her question outright, but that wouldn't be as effective. Instead, he made her answer it herself. What do you think it's about, Sophia? Another murmur rippled through the audience. Some people turned to each other, whispering. They could sense it. The dynamic of the conversation was shifting. Sophia's lips parted slightly as if caught off guard. She blinked once, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. I think it's about power, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative, and history, and how symbols like yours have been used to enforce a system where one group dictated morality for everyone else. The words were sharp, precise. They were meant to paint him into a corner, to force him to either defend a history of religious dominance or concede that it was time for those symbols to take a back seat. But Eastwood wasn't playing that game. He nodded again, slow and thoughtful. Then after a pause, he replied, So let's talk about power then. Sophia sat back slightly. You're saying that faith, my faith, has historically been a dominant force in Western culture, correct? Sophia nodded. Yes. And that dominance makes people uncomfortable now. Another nod. For many people, yes. Eastwood inhaled deeply, then exhaled through his nose. He tapped his fingers lightly against the table before speaking again. Okay, so if power is the problem, then the solution should be fairness. Equal treatment, right? Sophia hesitated, as if sensing where this was going. In principle, yes. Eastwood nodded. Good. So let's say someone else sat in this chair today, wearing a different symbol, a different representation of their identity. Maybe it's a pride flag pin. Maybe it's a Black Lives Matter bracelet. Would you ask them to take it off? Silence. This time, it wasn't just the audience watching Sophia. It was the entire country. She opened her mouth, stopped. She knew the answer. Everyone knew the answer. No, she wouldn't have asked them to remove it. And that was the entire point. Clint Eastwood didn't just defend himself. He forced everyone watching to rethink the very foundation of Sophia's argument. Sophia, realizing she couldn't afford another long silence, finally responded. That's not the same. Eastwood didn't miss a beat. Why not? The moment stretched. The audience was no longer just watching a debate. They were watching a fundamental shift in perspective unfold in real time. Sophia, for the first time in the interview, looked like she wasn't sure how to proceed. And that's when the first clap rang out. Just one at first, then another, and another, until a wave of applause moved through the audience. They weren't just clapping for Eastwood. They were clapping because they had just witnessed something rare. A moment where someone didn't just defend their position, but exposed the flaw in their opponent's logic without aggression, without hostility, without personal attacks. Sophia straightened, pressing her lips together. She glanced toward the producers behind the cameras. An unspoken question. Do we cut to commercial? But the control room knew better. This moment was already viral. There was no stopping it now. And Eastwood, he didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he sat back, placed his hands together, and simply said, I respect different beliefs, Sophia. I always have. But respect isn't just about letting people believe what they want in private. It's about allowing them to express those beliefs in public, just like everyone else. Another round of applause. Sophia exhaled, forcing a tight smile. All right, she said, regaining some of her composure. I think we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, let's talk about what real inclusivity looks like. The show cut to commercial, but the conversation, it was far from over. Because on every platform, every network, every social media feed, one clip was already being shared faster than anything else that night. Clint Eastwood calmly turning the tables on one of the sharpest interviewers in the industry with nothing but logic, patience, and unshakable conviction. And the debate that followed? It wouldn't be about whether he won that exchange. It would be about how badly. The second the screen faded to black for the commercial break, the controlled energy of the live broadcast dissolved into chaos. Sophia Grant ripped off her microphone and turned to her producer, who was already approaching with a concerned expression. How bad is it? she asked, voice clipped. Professional? The producer hesitated. He didn't need to check the live analytics to know the answer. It was already spiraling. Social media was on fire. Screens across the control room showed a flood of real-time reactions. That wasn't just an interview. That was a reckoning. He stayed calm, he stayed logical, and she walked herself into a trap. I don't care what side you're on. Clint Eastwood just handed out a masterclass in debate. The moment she hesitated, it was over. She knew it. We all knew it. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Joshua Eastwood unshaken, Joshua checkmate, Joshua Lev Faith under fire. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a cultural shift happening in real time. The studio, damage control mode. Sophia exhaled sharply, schooling her features into a look of calm before slipping her microphone back on. She knew the next segment would be critical. If she could regain control, she could shift the narrative before it got completely out of her hands. But in the back of her mind, she already knew it was too late. She glanced over at Eastwood. He hadn't moved, still composed, still patient. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smug. He was just waiting. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. The red light above the camera blinked on. They were live again. Sophia straightened, flashing a carefully measured smile. "Welcome back," she said smoothly. "Before the break, we had a spirited discussion about symbols, faith, and public representation. Clint, I want to give you a chance to clarify." "I think I was already clear." The response was polite, even-toned, but it carried weight. Sophia's lips pressed together for half a second before she recovered. "Well, let's talk about the broader conversation then. You're one of the most iconic figures in American cinema. Do you think people see you as a symbol more than a person?" Eastwood considered for a moment. "I think people see what they want to see." Sophia leaned forward slightly. "And what do you want them to see?" Eastwood let out a slow breath before answering. "That standing by your beliefs doesn't mean silencing others. That conviction doesn't require aggression. That we can have these conversations without turning them into battles." The words weren't just directed at her. They were for everyone. The studio audience, the viewers at home, the people flooding comment sections across the internet. Even Sophia felt the shift. She recognized that tone, the kind politicians used when they were playing the long game. This wasn't just about this interview anymore. It was about something bigger. The reaction beyond the studio. Within an hour, major news outlets picked up the story. Headlines varied depending on political leanings. CNN, Clint Eastwood defends faith in heated interview. Fox News, Sophia Grant stumbles as Eastwood stands his ground. The Guardian, debate over religious symbols takes center stage in viral TV moment. New York Times, a Hollywood legend enters the culture wars. But no matter how they framed it, one thing was clear. This wasn't just an interview. It was a defining moment. Sophia's reputation takes a hit. The fallout wasn't limited to Eastwood's viral moment. Sophia, known for her sharp debating skills, found herself facing backlash from unexpected places. Even people who normally agreed with her took issue with how she handled the exchange. Some of the online criticism. You don't ask someone to take off their beliefs and expect no pushback. If the roles were reversed, this wouldn't even be a debate. Respecting differences means respecting all differences, not just the ones you agree with. Her network released a carefully worded statement, distancing itself just enough without outright admitting she had mishandled the situation. Sophia Grant has long been an advocate for open dialogue, and last night's discussion sparked important conversations about representation, faith, and personal identity. We remain committed to fostering thoughtful debate on these complex topics. It was corporate speak for, "We know this was bad, but we're not throwing her under the bus yet." Behind the scenes, sponsors were raising concerns. Some even paused advertising placements to see how the controversy unfolded. For the first time in her career, Sophia wasn't just the one controlling the conversation. She was the conversation. Eastwood's reaction, meanwhile, Eastwood remained silent. No social media posts, no press releases, nothing. And that ironically only made the moment grow larger. Commentators, journalists, and influencers all debated, is this a calculated move? Does he even realize how big this moment has become? The restraint is brilliant. He doesn't need to say anything. The internet is saying it for him. And then, 12 hours later, he finally broke his silence with a single post. Some things speak for themselves. No hashtags, no explanation, just that. Within minutes, it had over 1 million likes. The long-term impact. The fallout didn't just last a few days. It changed the narrative around Clint Eastwood entirely. For years, he had been seen as an iconic figure in Hollywood, respected but sometimes controversial, a legend whose political views were often debated. But now he had a moment. And whether people supported him or not, they had to acknowledge one thing. He had handled it masterfully. This wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't a controversy that made him look weak. It was the exact opposite. He hadn't lost his temper. He hadn't stumbled. He hadn't fallen into the trap set for him. He had controlled the conversation without ever raising his voice. And that, more than anything else, was what people would remember. The morning after the interview, the media landscape was unrecognizable. Major networks had scrambled overnight to assemble panel discussions, think pieces, and emergency PR responses. What had started as just another heated interview had transformed into a cultural flashpoint. Headlines reflected the divide. The Atlantic: did Clint Eastwood just redefine political debate for a new generation? Fox News: Grace under fire, Eastwood's poise leaves media stunned. MSNBC: Sophia Grant faces backlash after controversial interview moment. BBC: the necklace debate, a symbol of faith or a symbol of power. Sophia Grant, known for her sharp control of every interview she conducted, had lost this one, and everyone saw it. Yet in public, she tried to maintain a calm, strategic front. The morning after, she appeared on another network's panel discussion. "I think what happened last night was an important conversation," she said smoothly. "It showed just how deeply these issues resonate with people. But no amount of corporate-approved damage control could change what had already happened." The moment wasn't just about the interview anymore. It was about what it represented. And the one person not scrambling to react? Clint Eastwood. Eastwood's silence speaks louder than words. Unlike Sophia, Eastwood made no media rounds, no follow-ups, no press conferences. He let the moment breathe. It was a strategy few expected from someone his age. But it was brilliant. No desperate clarifications, no emotional outbursts, no feeding the outrage cycle. Just silence. And that silence, it only made the moment grow bigger. Social media influencers, podcast hosts, and political analysts all speculated on his approach. This is next-level PR control. I don't even think it was intentional, but it's working. Clint Eastwood just did in one interview what most politicians spend decades trying to do: command respect. Every attempt to shift the narrative, every think piece, every spin kept circling back to the same undeniable truth. He had won, not because he had attacked, not because he had shouted, but because he had done the exact opposite. He had simply refused to be shaken. Sophia faces consequences. While Eastwood remained silent, Sophia Grant was in full damage control mode. She hadn't expected the backlash to be this bad. Her network executives were nervous. Sponsors had pulled back. Internal memos hinted at an image rehabilitation plan. Corporate speak for, "We need to fix this before advertisers start bailing." It wasn't that she had lost an argument. It was that she had been caught trying to enforce a double standard. And even her own audience noticed. A week later, she released a formal statement. "I have always prided myself on creating spaces for honest discussion, and in my conversation with Clint Eastwood, I recognize that my approach may not have reflected that commitment as well as it should have." The non-apology apology. It was carefully crafted, acknowledging but not admitting. It was a play straight out of the media survival handbook. But by the time she released it, the conversation had already moved past her. This wasn't about Sophia Grant anymore. It was about what she represented. The bigger picture, a shift in the cultural narrative. As the days passed, analysts started asking a bigger question. Did we just witness a generational shift in political debate? For years, media figures like Sophia had relied on control. They framed the discussions. They dictated the terms. They chose who was respected and who was dismissed. But that model was breaking. And this interview, it proved it. Because Clint Eastwood didn't play by those old rules. He didn't get defensive. He didn't accept the false premise of the debate. He stayed calm, made his point, and let the contradictions reveal themselves. And the public saw it happen in real time. The most shocking part, even some of his critics respected how he handled it. Left-leaning journalists admitted, "I don't like his politics, but I have to admit he handled that like a pro." YouTube analysts broke down the exchange, pointing out where Sophia lost control. Psychologists discussed why calm composure under pressure makes someone more persuasive. This was bigger than just a debate. It was a new playbook for how to handle public challenges in the digital age. Eastwood's final statement. 3 days after the interview, Eastwood finally broke his silence. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't a press conference. It was a simple tweet. Conviction isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't attack. It just stands. That was it. No hashtags, no explanations. Just a quiet, undeniable statement. And it exploded. 2 million likes in 24 hours. Retweeted by celebrities, political figures, even people who had criticized him in the past. Paraphrased in headlines, quoted in speeches, turned into viral posts. It was more than a response, it was a philosophy. And in a world where political conversations had become shouting matches, where debates were often won by whoever yelled the loudest, Eastwood had just shown an entire generation another way. One where conviction wasn't about volume. It was about unshakable certainty. The legacy of the interview. Months later, people were still talking about the moment. Some called it the night the media lost control. Some called it the rise of a new kind of political presence. Some just called it damn good television. But no matter what side they were on, one thing was clear. Clint Eastwood walked into that studio as a guest. He walked out as something else entirely.